Hi, and welcome to this video book launch. I'm Joanna Page, and I'm one of the co-editors of Geopolitics, Culture and the Scientific Imaginary in Latin America, which was published last month by the University of Florida Press.
Hello, I am Maria del Pilar Blanco and I co-edited this volume with Joanna. As a conventional book launch was not possible at the moment, we thought that we would put together a short video introducing the book. We're going to give you a brief overview of it, and this will be followed by some special guest appearances by three of our contributors.
The book explores relationships between science, politics and culture at several key moments in Latin American history, from the early colonial period until the present day. It arose out of a series of events that we organised with funding from the AHRC Research Network Scheme. This allowed us to bring together researchers from Europe, the Americas and beyond in conferences and workshops held in Oxford, Cambridge, Buenos Aires and San Juan in Puerto Rico. At those events and in the book itself, we wanted to tell some alternative stories about how science and the imaginaries of science have developed in Latin America that haven't been given much emphasis in previous work. There have been some important studies of the history of science in Latin America that set out the very real challenges of conducting research without sustained funding or strong institutional support. In many narratives, Latin American science is positioned as dependent and undeveloped in comparison to science in the global north. Science is often seen as an import into the region that has deepened inequalities, justified racism, furthered political repression, and shored up the power of the modernizing elites. We wanted to bring nuance to those narratives by focusing on science in Latin America as a crucial site of exchange between indigenous and foreign cultures. We felt it was vital to show how science has been put to use in a wide range of political and cultural projects, including ones with an emancipatory end. We also wanted to highlight the significant contributions made by Latin American thinkers and writers to the philosophy of science, particularly in critiques of modernity and epistemology. Many of those contributions are helping us to rethink science within interdisciplinary and intercultural contexts, and this is a theme of growing importance across the world today. So, in short, we were interested in forging a more relational understanding of how scientific knowledge is produced in Latin America.
The events we organised brought to light a huge range of interesting projects being carried out across the world on questions of science, politics, and culture in Latin America. In the book, we were only able to bring a small selection of these together, but we were keen to express in it the geographical, historical, and disciplinary breadth of these engagements. The book is unusual in the way that it works across so many disciplines, including history, sociology, geography, literature, and cultural studies. We also felt it was important to include research on the colonial period, the new republics of the 19th century, through to the 20th and 21st centuries, as well as allowing us to create connections between these periods and to highlight fields of research that are sometimes sidelined. This also helped us to focus on the changing meanings of science across time. Each of the essays acts as a case study for the kinds of interdisciplinary and intercultural exchanges that we wanted to emphasize. These are then brought together in thematic sections with a short introduction which situates these case studies within broader dialogues and debates. The first section of the book examines commonly held assumptions about Latin American science and offers a set of possible ways to challenge those assumptions. One of these, held by multiple histories of science, tends to represent science as something that arrives in Latin America from elsewhere. From explorations of Argentine paleontology to agricultural essays that augur the arrival of anthropocentric theory, the essays compiled in this section explore examples of Latin American scientific observation that overcome the bounds of the local to become matters of global import. The second section focuses on Latin America's natural and cultural diversity and the way it has shaped conceptions of science from the colonial period to the present. The history of the region is also one of intercultural contact, which occurs constantly on an everyday level. Such stories of contact have had a transformative effect on scientific knowledge. The chapters here offer detailed accounts of these kinds of transformations, in fields as diverse as medicine, mining, and psychology. It's a critical commonplace to think of science as a hegemonic tool in national projects across Latin America from the 19th century into the 20th. The chapters in the third section consider the relationship between politics and science, but with a difference. They offer examples of local, popular, and non vertical alignments of science and politics that result in turn in new and creative ways of understanding pivotal historical moments for the countries of the region.
The fourth section explores some of the extensive exchanges between art, literature, and science that have shaped Latin American culture, from the close relationship between literary modernismo, spiritualism, and science at the turn of the 20th century to contemporary cyberfiction. These convergences between art and science can often be read as utopian quests for a unified field of knowledge that is transdisciplinary and often intercultural. In different ways, the writers and intellectuals explored in the final section challenge the linearity and universalism of narratives of modernity. And they do this as part of a broader critique of the geopolitics of scientific knowledge. We've asked the author of each essay in this section to give a quick overview of their contribution.
Hi, my name is Carlos Fonseca. I'm the author of the chapter entitled Laboratories of Universality, a genealogy of solitary Latin American inventors. In this chapter, I trace a genealogy around the figure of the lonely scientist, which first emerges in Alexander von Humboldt's personal narrative of his voyages through Latin America, where while trekking the Venezuelan plains, he encounters a man called Carlos del Pozo, who seems to have reinvented the electrical machine from just having read two treatises in French regarding electricity. Around that idea of a Latin American solitary scientist that, without recourse or any contact with the metropolitan centers of knowledge, imagines or reimagines science, I construct a genealogy that later goes on to discuss Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The Aleph, with the character of Carlos Argentino Daneri, before going on to discuss the character of José Arcadio Buendía in Gabriel García Márquez's 100 Years of Solitude, and finishing with Ricardo Piglias's Luca Belladonna from his most recent novel, Blanco Nocturno. What interests me about this genealogy or this figure is the possibility of thinking about critique of science as a model of universality that will allow us also to build a theory of cosmopolitanism, as well as a theory of reading and translation.
My contribution to this volume emerges from an interest in nonlinear ways of conceiving of reality and the role of Latin American thinkers in the emergence of this vision. I have come to understand nonlinearity as an ecological proposition, resisting the modernist desire to turn all that exists into quantifiable categories responding to a transparent logic of cause and effect, and thus ultimately subject to human control. In the late 1970s, Argentine physicist and philosopher Rolando Garcia developed a theory of complex systems, which is relational, nonlinear, non-anthropocentric, and dynamic. Garcia was among the first to refute simple atmospheric explanations to complex problems, such as large-scale drought and subsequent famine in the Sahel region of Africa. He proposed instead a challenging response. Nature pleads not guilty. It pleads not guilty because communities' actual access to food is governed by much slower and politically inflicted processes than weather changes and water scarcity. This includes community ties and the organization and distribution of human settlements, processes that have been shaped by colonial histories, agricultural traditions, war, and religion. In the face of environmental, cultural, and biological problems, complexity offers environmental, cultural, and biological forms of reason that rupture previous Western traditions of thought.
A couple of years ago, when rereading the essays of José Carlos Mariátegui, I noticed that there were a number of references to Albert Einstein and to his theory of relativity. all across his writings. And that led me to ask myself what was the ideological and discursive role played by the theory of relativity in Mariátegi's essays. In my chapter, I show how Mariátegui politicizes the theory of relativity by taking the scientific revolution carried out by Einstein as a model for his ideological and political revolution. If Albert Einstein had shown the relativity of time and space, so thought Mariátegui, the role of a political revolutionary ought to be to show the relativity of capitalism, of the ideological foundations of bourgeois society, and of such categories as Eurocentrism and the very idea of progress. In this respect, Mariátegi's appropriation of the theory of relativity is a primary example of the contrast between the alleged universality of scientific discourse on the one hand and its political mobilization and uses at a local level across history. In addition, Mariátegi's appropriation of the theory of relativity can be seen as a primary example of the decolonization of the Latin American scientific imaginary.
Many of the essays in the last section and the book as a whole take a decolonizing approach to studying the development of science and the scientific imaginary in Latin America. We have only been able to feature a few of the essays here, but we hope that this video has given you a glimpse of some of the excellent work that has been compiled in this book, and also a sense of its overall aims and scope. We really do hope that this book will be useful to a whole range of scholars from different disciplinary quarters. Thank you so much for watching.